Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, 3 reasons why network security policy management is a big deal. And with me today to present is Ron Kehoe. He is a solutions engineer for TUFIN and a CISSP certified professional. And we're going to wait a few more minutes and give others the chance to join. But I'll just say hi to Ron. Hi, Ron. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. So we'll just let others join. We'll wait a couple more minutes. And in the meantime, I just want to share with you that our presentation today is 45 minutes. We will, of course, leave time for questions at the end. So if you do have a question during the webinar, please click the questions button and type in your question, and we will have time to answer that at the end of the webinar. We also have an attachment today. So the attachment to the webinar is an infographic around today's security challenges. And Ron is actually going to go through some of these challenges, so you also have the infographic if you want to go through that. So we're just going to wait a couple more minutes before we actually get started. Okay, so we're almost ready to get started here. Joining me today for this webinar is Ron Kehoe, Senior Solutions Engineer for TUFIN. And as a Senior Solutions Engineer at TUFIN, Ron Kehoe is responsible for supporting the sales team through product demonstrations and customer proof of concept management, as well as serving as a technical advocate for new customers. And prior to joining TUFIN, Ron was actually a network security manager at First Republic Bank. So a lot of background around the topics that he's going to discuss today. Ron brings over 30 years of experience in security solutions architecture and consulting, and is of course certified CISSP. So Ron gave a similar session at a Data Center World conference earlier this year, and this was very well received. So we decided to also hold this webinar around 3 reasons why network security policy management is a big deal. And Ron, I know that during Data Center World, this was kind of a new topic, so I'm not sure. Did you find that a lot of people in the audience were familiar with the NSPM, or was that kind of a new topic to them?
Well, that's funny you should ask, because it was new. When I was describing, as I'll be going through this webinar, describing the technology, one of the questions that had come up was whether or not this technology actually exists, or I'm talking about the future. And when I indicated, no, this technology exists today, some people were surprised. They didn't think it actually was there. So I would say to most people it was new, though we're seeing more and more indication in the marketplace, at least customers that I deal with daily, that more people are embracing this technology and the ideas around it.
Okay, great. So to those who are just joining, we haven't started yet. This is, I was just introducing Ron and the topic that we were going to cover today. So we're going to start right now. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar session. Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can start us off.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And good day, everybody, and thank you very much for joining. As mentioned, Ron Kehoe here. So the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about network security policy management, kind of defining what it is and what it means, but also why it's so important in today's heterogeneous and hybrid environments that we'll see. Some of it so we're going to be addressing some of the challenges and some of the solutions that exist out there today. So first off, we'll be talking about what is network security policy management. We'll talk about some of the challenges, as I just mentioned, and then also we'll take a look at the solution and, really how this can alleviate a lot of the concerns that a lot of my customers I see have out there, but also a lot of the concerns I had when I was in a similar position in previous engagements. So the question is, what is network security policy management? So network security policy management really addresses the need that we're seeing right now in the area of network growth in the enterprise. So networks are growing, they're becoming more complicated, and as these networks are growing and becoming more complicated, applying the right security policies at the right network control points is challenging. We have multi-path environments, we have environments that can reach perhaps into the cloud and so on. Knowing where to make the appropriate changes is a challenge. It's not like it was, say, 15 years ago when all we had were firewalls that were protecting the perimeter. Now security devices, and I say firewalls, but it's more than firewalls. Now these security devices are throughout the entire environment, both at the perimeter, inside the environment, inside VMs, and so on. So making sure that you're applying the right policy at the right point is one of the challenges that we have. Having heterogeneous solutions complicates this and makes it difficult to maintain the environment. So network security policy management is meant to deal with this. It's meant to provide the visibility across that dynamic environment I'm describing and can make the actual provisioning of policy easier. As the slide indicates, that this network security policy management was rated high in Gartner's Hype Cycle for Infrastructure Protection report. So it is there, it does exist, and it is growing. So now let's take a look at what some of the data center challenges are that we might see in the environment. Okay, so challenge number one, firewall management. So what we're seeing in the environment today, and I saw this in previous places, is as companies have adopted an agile approach to software development and deployment, frequency of changes are increasing. In some cases, again, if I look back 15 years ago, changes were very static and they may change a few times a month, but now we're seeing changes that are several times, if not 20 to 30 times a day. So this frequency of change does increase the workload for the personnel responsible for employing or deploying the firewall changes in your environment. Additionally, given that we have more firewalls and that they're just not on the perimeter anymore, the changes end up becoming much more complex, understanding what devices need to be updated in order to satisfy a change request. So the more complex change and the more frequent changes do create an environment where, again, it's very difficult to do the changes in a timely manner. And on top of this, because of organizations are taking this agile approach, the SLA agreements or the SLAs on making these changes have decreased. So more work, more complicated changes with less time to actually do the changes is a challenge in today's organization. Additionally, again, still within the idea of the firewall management as being a challenge, byproduct of the increase in the firewall changes in the size and complexity are that firewall rules aren't being necessarily well maintained. If you can imagine, you have an individual who's responsible for, or a team that's responsible for deploying firewall rules to the environment, but the frequencies increase, the complexities increase, their SLAs have decreased, something has got to give. And what that usually means is that in some cases, the rules are not being well maintained. That could be the case of perhaps you have redundant rules that are in your firewall environment. You have rules that are not being properly tracked. You don't know why the rule is there. Perhaps you had turnover in your staff and the documentation wasn't there to help support why a rule was there to start with. There's no direct relationship between rules and the business owner for that rule. these all create a bit of a quagmire within your firewall environment. And then also, once we start taking a look at the bloat that can exist, where we see rules are continually being added to the firewall to meet the business needs, pretty soon that rule base can bloat to the point where no human can cope or understand the rules that are there. I've seen environments where there are in excess of 300,000 rules on a single firewall. So what human would ever understand what each one of those 300,000 rules is there for? So in other words, having that understanding of each and every rule is important. And right now in the environment, it's very difficult to get that without something like a network security policy management platform. So as we take a look at this, this is going to be important because as rules do become more complicated and as we see firewall bloat, or what we end up seeing is a paralysis as well. I've seen organizations that are afraid to remove a rule from their firewalls because they do not understand what the rule is there for. And removing the rule they fear will break the business. So having that confidence to be able to maintain the firewall rules appropriate is important, as opposed to just continually add rule after rule after rule and creating an environment where you're not even sure what that security device is doing anymore. And then additionally, what we're seeing, through the activities like mergers and acquisitions, or for that matter, many times selecting best of breed security devices, we do find that multiple firewall vendors exist in a single organization. Be it could be a Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Cisco, Juniper, and so on, but all these different technologies will exist in one environment. And this also leads to a challenge with firewall management. For one, retaining a subject matter expert in all those technologies is difficult. And also, as you bring in new capabilities, there's training that has to occur and understanding it, and also just understanding even the syntax changes between different firewalls when you're implementing one change that might touch 3 or 4 different vendors' firewalls. Again, the more technology that you have in your environment, increase the likelihood of administrative errors. And those administrative errors can lead, maybe not in worst case scenario, but can lead to audit findings, or in worst case scenario, can lead to an environment that allows a hacker or somebody else to gain unauthorized access to your environment. So complexity makes it hard also to meet your own service level agreements, your SLAs, because now you have to try to design a rule that is touching multiple vendor environments. So the result here is, as you can see, today in most organizations, large organizations, everybody's trying to do more, faster, in a more complex environment. And this can be a recipe for disaster. Not only does this complexity increase the attack surface, as I've already mentioned, by creating unnecessary or perhaps even inappropriate rules, but it can also negatively impact business continuity in your environment. In other words, without really understanding why a rule is there, it's possible that you can take out or disable an application by putting the wrong rule or removing the wrong rule from your environment. So really gaining that understanding is going to be crucial into understanding what your firewall rules are doing. The second challenge that we're seeing is within organizations is the idea that the cloud adoption. It's been going on for a while and it's accelerating. There are good reasons to move to the cloud, be it a public cloud like perhaps AWS or Azure, or for that matter, even the Google Cloud Platform, or private cloud environments like VMware or NSX or OpenStack. We're seeing that organizations are investing heavily in cloud, and there's a reason for it. It's the agility and the elasticity that the cloud provides to an organization. According to research from ESG conducted in 2016, most organizations are adopting a hybrid cloud strategy, where they're investing in both in the private and public cloud environment. So while moving to this cloud environment does have obvious benefits, and again, as mentioned, the elasticity, the quick ability to deploy new capabilities, it also introduces challenges to the organization. So what we end up getting with this introduction of both private and public cloud is we end up getting the heterogeneous network. Again, if I look 15 years ago, heterogeneous networks really didn't exist. Now we're getting environments that are going to be made up of regular on-prem data center with traditional firewall environments, And then we also have virtual environments within that, which is going to be private cloud, but then additionally onto the public cloud side. And each one of these environments have security concerns, and applications can exist across all these environments. So understanding this does become a challenge. It means that networks are really becoming more and more complicated, and even when we take a look at how the network security is modeled across these different environments, they're all modeled differently. So when you consider that an application can span across the data center, the cloud, managing that is a challenge. So, and who ends up managing it? I mean, within the data center, we might think of it as being the normal IT security team will manage that environment, or a network security team. But in the cloud, we're seeing more instances of shadow IT organizations existing, DevOps taking over responsibility for those areas. This by itself is concerning because now we're losing visibility and understanding how the cloud environment is being managed and maintained. So 62% report it's difficult to get the same level of visibility into cloud-based workloads as in physical networks. And that's true. Most people don't have visibility into that environment. I've seen organizations that know there's a cloud environment there only because they're paying the monthly fee for it. So that is concerning. You have your data, you have your infrastructure deployed, but you have no idea how it's being managed, how it's being maintained. 69% of cybersecurity professionals indicate that their organization is still learning how to apply its security policies to public and private cloud infrastructure. And that's concerning as well because they've already deployed systems into that environment. They've already deployed applications, but yet they haven't got their arms around the idea of how to apply their security policies there. 56% of cybersecurity professionals indicate that their organization's current network security operation and process lack the right level of automation and orchestration needed for the cloud. The cloud changes quickly, and you need to have an ability to change quickly with that environment. And then finally, 52% of security professionals strongly agree with the statement that the security team does not have the appropriate staff level to manage network security operations for a cloud infrastructure. As we complicate the environment without a network security policy management framework or tool set, the only solution is to throw more people at it. And throwing more people sometimes creates more of a problem. So we need to address this. And we need to address this concern. The third challenge is the compliance jungle. Okay, as you know, coming from a financial services background myself, I'm well aware of some of the regulatory requirements that are out there. So changes to the environment, whenever you're making a change to your environment, it needs to be measured against whatever compliance standards you must adhere to. It could be regulatory in nature. For instance, PCI and SOX are an example of regulatory compliances. Or it could be industry best practices, be it ISO or NIST. Or even on top of that, it might be your own corporate security policies. As I've seen in the past, typically regulatory and industry best practices tend to be more along the lines of being the floor, not the ceiling, when it comes to security policies. So corporate security policies tend to be more concise and more well-written to an organization's real need and risk profile. But either way, you need to have an ability when performing network security policy management. It's not just a case of pushing changes out to your environment quickly or understanding the relationship between applications and your environment, but it's also ensuring that as changes are being made, that they're being made in concert with the various regulatory or otherwise standards or compliances that you must adhere to. The dangers here of not adhering to it are pretty simple. I mean, obviously, violations can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. In the case of perhaps banking, if we take a look at failing to meet regulatory compliance, this can have direct impact on insurance costs. For instance, FDIC insurance is directly related to the examinations that are performed. And then also, if you're not maintaining your environment well, it will for sure guarantee future and even more intrusive examinations of your environment. So with that being said, you need to have your shop in order with regards to how you monitor and how you measure your ability to be compliant to whatever it is you need to be compliant to. So firewall management, rapid cloud adoption, and complexity are the areas that we're looking at here with regards to the challenges. So what is the solution then? So really what's required now is, I'd like to think of it as a manager of managers, but it's actually more than that. So you need a single management console that will enable us to manage security policies across the hybrid cloud and physical networks. Each vendor, has its single pane of glass, but that's only for its infrastructure. What we really need is that single pane of glass for all those other single panes of glasses, if you will. We need to be able to see the entire environment from a single environment and be able to manage it and ensure compliance and ensure timeliness of changes and ensure that documentation is done appropriately. That is the ultimate goal. So really what we're trying to do is increase business agility without compromising security. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to allow security, information security, if you will, to move at the speed of business, even in today's agile environment. And more importantly, we want to allow the business to move securely. So we want to take care of both sides of it. We want to look at the environment holistically and not as individual islands. We don't want to treat our cloud environment different than our internal environment, different than a private cloud environment. We want to treat them all the same and measure compliance across the entire environment identically. We want to understand the impact that one change can make across the entire environment. So if I make a change inside my physical data center, what is that going to do for perhaps my cloud environment and my applications that I have deployed there? So we want to understand that as well. Again, we want to ensure constant compliance checking, and as well as a full, and this is as important, but a full documented history of all changes made to the environment. So when you're standing in front of an auditor or an examiner, you can, with confidence, show the environment and understand why each and every access that's been granted, why it's there, how it's there, what's the history behind it, okay? So everyone, as mentioned, everyone claims to have that single pane of glass, and they do for their technologies, but we have that single pane of glass for all of their single panes of glasses. So now the question is, how do we get there? So step one, in this case, is visibility and connectivity. And what that means is you have to be able to understand your environment first. Really, you need to pull in all your firewall policies and all your security groups from your cloud environment. You need to pull in all your business applications and understand the relationship of those applications to your firewall rules or security groups that you have within the cloud. You need to be able to understand the routing and the subnets that are in the environment and understand what that looks like, understand what NAT does in your environment, understand what VRF does, understand the entire environment and how it operates. It's not just a case of looking at firewall rules, it's a case of understanding the whole topology of your environment. And again, the key thing here is that you cannot secure what you cannot see. So having that visibility is paramount and the first step towards implementing and fully appreciating a network security policy management solution. Once you've achieved the visibility and connectivity, the next thing is regulatory compliance. Build that framework. Understand what your regulatory compliance is. Work with the chief compliance officer and your network security team to really understand, what are the things that you need to be looking for in your environment. So define compliance requirements and track them based on the central environment. For instance, requirements for change monitoring accountability can be addressed in real time with change tracking and reporting. Requirements around justification and recertification demand maintaining a central repository for policy metadata. What that means is understanding what every single rule is and understanding that that rule may have to be recertified occasionally depending on your own organization's compliance requirements, but that rule may need to be recertified on occasion. Perhaps it's annually, perhaps it's every 6 months. But that can only be achieved by knowing where that rule is tied to and understanding when that rule needs to come up for recertification and who is the appropriate person to recertify that rule. Regulatory requirements should be documented centrally and used to identify and handle violations from a single console. You shouldn't be in a position to have to run a report just before the auditors or the examiners show up to your facility. What you should be doing is you should be doing constant compliance monitoring. In other words, as violations are occurring, if perhaps a change has been introduced to the environment that violates PCI or violates SOX, as those changes are occurring, you want to know about that right away, not the week before your regulator comes in or the week before your QSA comes in to assess your environment. Okay. Often, when I look at change control and monitoring the environment, the two questions I always ask myself are changes in my network, are they authorized? And having that visibility into whether or not changes are authorized is key. That I can take a look that as each change is being made across my entire environment, I can tell whether or not it's authorized. But the other question is, not only is it authorized, but is it appropriate? Is the change that's been made, is it appropriate? So having the ability to measure the appropriateness, either from the perspective of a regulatory check, or really just from the perspective of, am I creating risk to my environment, is also important. So setting that up, setting up the template that will measure that is important towards network security policy management. And really by doing a lot of this upfront work and getting these measurements out there and deployed, what you're going to find is that later on when it comes to doing change management and implementing change and provisioning, you're going to find that if you're following the ITIL standard and you're using a change approval board, you're going to find that change approval board's job becomes a lot easier. Because from a technology and compliance perspective, we're already able to identify whether or not you're in compliance or not. So now the CAB or the change approval board's job becomes a little easier. They don't need to really measure whether or not this is a regulatory problem because we've already done that. They can now be saying whether or not it's appropriate to go ahead and make this change based on other company indicators. Perhaps it's a blackout time for the company and no changes are allowed during the blackout time. But that's the concept here, is we're trying to make things easier for the folks responsible for monitoring the changes made in the environment. And lastly, and probably the most important thing, when it comes to auditing, having something like this where you have a repeatable and documented process is huge. Auditors, when they come in and they want to see your environment, they want to see how you're measuring change to the environment and how you're ensuring that change is in compliance with the regulatory requirements, they want to see something that's repeatable and documented. And implementing it into a network security policy management system does just that. You have the documented evidence of how you're doing your change, and it's repeatable because it's being done automatically each and every time changes are being provisioned to the environment. So the next step, if you think about it in the various steps that we're making along the way here, is application connectivity. And this is interesting. Historically, firewall rules or security policies, if you will, within the environment have always been just a series of discrete rules that have been created to support a request. But they're not really tied back to a specific application. So now what we're seeing more in the software-defined networking environment and in various technologies that are out there today, they're taking the application-centric view of changes to your security devices, to your firewalls, or to your cloud environment. We don't deploy changes just to deploy changes. We deploy these changes in support of an application. So we need the ability to be able to automatically, based on the needs of an application, automatically deploy and provision changes to the environment. Again, if we think about the agile environment, this is huge. We can have our DevOps team develop and lay out a blueprint of an application, which can then be translated and created into discrete access changes to the appropriate devices at the appropriate time. Kind of going back to our first slide when we talked about some of the challenges is making the right change to the right device. That's what will happen here. But it's not only just creating that change, it's also creating the documented history of that. In other words, understanding that as I'm making changes to firewalls, as I'm making changes to security groups within a cloud environment, I know what changes have been made and what application those changes are supporting. So and because now I've developed that relationship between the changes or the access that's on those devices and the application, if anybody goes in and disables a rule that should happen to break my application, I'm not going to learn of this from my help desk. Okay, I'm going to learn because the system is constantly monitoring those rules. And if a rule gets deleted, it will mark the application as disabled, and then appropriate alerts can be sent out to the appropriate personnel to correct the problem. Okay, so we get a value from a business continuity perspective that we can go through and be able to ensure that an application is up and running all the time. But again, if we start taking a look at software-defined networking and some of the other capabilities that are coming out through APIs, the ability to integrate with other third parties to have applications automatically deployed is huge. So now we're not looking at network security policy management as a tool. Rather, we're looking at network security policy management as a enterprise capability, as an enterprise platform, almost like a security middleware that other tools can plug into. The step 4 is policy and segmentation. Today we hear all the time about microsegmentation, especially within cloud environment. We hear about within the traditional data center, segmentation has been there for a while now. Again, we go back a long time, 15 years or so. Maybe not so much in the area of segmentation, but now within the traditional data center, we have segmentations that work well with various VLANs or subnets and so on and so forth. But when we start pushing into a cloud environment, micro-segmentation and the concept of IP addresses and VLANs and so on, that don't matter as much. They're little. It's not that micro-segmentation doesn't matter, but the ability to measure it becomes a little bit more difficult. So, having an ability to apply that first measurement that you're effectively performing micro-segmentation is important. And with that, you need to be able to measure it not just with IP addresses as you would in the normal data center, but in the cloud environment, perhaps with security groups, understanding the relationship between security groups and what's allowed or what's not allowed. Or even more than that, understanding the tags that are assigned to instances within the cloud and being able to measure whether or not the appropriate tags are in the right VPCs, for instance. So having that ability is huge. Having the ability to measure it is one thing, but also to be able to apply microsegmentation that's agnostic to the environment so that we can, say, hey, this is what our environment must look like, and I can measure that within AWS, I can measure that within NSX, I can measure that within Azure. It doesn't matter. It's going to be completely agnostic, but I am going to ensure that we are following our microsegmentation strategy, that we're only allowing what needs to talk to each other, and we're able to measure that. And that's one of the key problems that a lot of organizations have today. While they're deploying these environments into a cloud environment, they have no way to measure whether or not they are compliant with regards to their own security policies. So again, network security policy management is the solution for that. So once you've gone through the first 4 steps, which is essentially the visibility and the compliance, setting out compliances and the applications, and then measuring microsegmentation, the last step is really kind of the place to be, which is provisioning of policy changes, setting up automation and orchestration. While it's okay, to start with perhaps just monitoring the environment for a period of time, where you really want to get to is having everything automated and provisioned for you. So this automation will allow your organization, to meet those aggressive SLAs that you have. So as changes are coming in, we're not going to be looking at an SLA of a week with regards to how it may be done today when people are making the changes, but instead we can actually change that SLA down to minutes because that's how quickly we can go ahead and design and provision changes. Automation provides a documented, as mentioned earlier, a documented and repeatable process. By using automation, it'll always keep track of what's going on, what's been implemented, and to what applications is tied. Everything's documented and repeatable. Again, with automation, it will design your access change correctly the first time. So nobody's going to be making mistakes. Nobody's going to be applying it to the wrong device. Designs will be done properly the first time, which means the rate of redos goes down to 0. Additionally, with orchestration and automation, one of the things that you can do is you can actually check in advance to see whether or not the access that's being requested is already there. And if it is already there, then you can just go ahead and close down the ticket and indicate to the requester that this has already been done. It's been my history in talking to customers and other organizations that somewhere between 20 to 30% of all access changes that are coming in are already implemented on the firewalls or in the cloud security groups. So having the ability to check that quickly That's huge. That'll save you all kinds of time. Again, fully documented all your changes. And again, having this orchestration automation allows the business to be agile. But in addition, because we're doing compliance checks as we're doing the provisioning, it also allows the business to be secure. And then finally, having a system that's able to work with the heterogeneous hybrid environment reduces the reliance on subject matter experts and allows those subject matter experts to be responsible for the network security policy management platform itself, making sure it's doing its job, which in turn will be doing the job as far as doing provisioning and affecting the changes. So as mentioned, you don't have to do everything day one. Quite often in dealing with customers, they definitely go with the crawl, walk, run environment. The first step is typically, I want to see what my environment looks like. The second step is, I see what my environment looks like. Now I want to know how well I'm doing. Am I compliant? Am I not compliant? Do I have big problems I need to deal with here? Once that's done, then we can say, okay, now that I've got that under control, let's start plugging in my applications so I can understand the relationship between the rules, the security policies, and my application, which gives me the benefit of not only being able to apply applications quickly, but it also gives me the benefit of understanding from a business continuity perspective if an application gets broken because of a change made in the environment. Then, of course, we can do policy segmentation, which will measure appropriate micro-segmentation. And then once all that's done, everything's in place, now you're ready to provision policy changes. Now you're ready to turn the keys over and say, all right, now go ahead and start making the changes for me and only call me if you need help because you understand the environment. The network security policy management tool understands the environment, understands what regulatory requirements you need to abide by, and understands micro-segmentation, understands applications. It can now start making the changes for you. And we're seeing a lot of customers head in this path right now. In fact, the whole idea of having a automation engineer on staff, a lot of organizations have done that too, to deal exactly with these sort of capabilities. So to summarize here, what we're looking at is the firewall rules are often outdated, conflicting, redundant, okay? And with that being said, the way they're currently being managed and maintained, this does increase the attack surface of your environment. When migrating to a cloud, organizations quite often don't have the visibility they want or need. Having a tool that allows you to do that is huge. And then also, the security teams must address security and compliance challenges, not just before your regulator or your auditor comes in, but the whole way along across the entire environment. Network security policy management allows you to do that as well. So not only is it doing the visibility, not only is it doing the regulatory check, but it's also doing the provisioning and understanding of applications. And it is here today, and it is real, and it does work. So now, Maya, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions that may have come up. And I don't know if you're on mute or not, but I can't hear you.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for this great presentation. It was really great to hear from your insight and your experience, what the challenges are that you're seeing and how NSPM can address those. I think, again, so we're now opening this up for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type those in. Just click on the questions button and enter your question, and we'll do our best to answer that. So I think we have one question. And the question is, you talk about provisioning policy changes, but we use a ticketing system to process firewall changes today. Is the solution that you speak of, is that replacing the ticketing system or integrating with it?
Yeah, so great question. So the answer is, I hate to say it, the answer is both. It could replace it, but most organizations have made an investment in their ticketing systems and don't want to replace it. But the solution we have allows us to go into an organization that has no ticketing system, and we can act as a ticketing system for them. So we have, and we do have organizations that use us for that purpose. But whereas we may have a larger organization that already has an existing ticketing system, we fully integrate with that. And we've done many, many integrations with companies like ServiceNow and Jira and Remedy and so on. So we have the solution that I'm speaking of. Our solution has a rich API that allows us not only to accept ticket access requests from external ticketing systems, but to also be bidirectional in our conversation with that ticketing system. In other words, an access request comes from, let's just presume ServiceNow, into our solution. We go ahead and we start processing our workflow to provision a change, but perhaps we found risk in that provisioning question. So now we want to push back a question up into ServiceNow to the appropriate personnel, by the way, and saying, is this risk okay, or do we need to stop this request? So that's what I mean by bidirectional, that we can actually go back up to ServiceNow and say, hey, get the chief compliance officer or the chief risk officer, have them look at this review, this issue that we're having, and whether or not he wants to sign off on it. And if he does, that's fine. We'll get the notification back. The risk has been signed off. Continue with the provisioning. So again, we can either operate alone as an independent ticketing system, but we certainly do fully integrate with external ticketing systems as well.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, so we're going to wait for a couple more questions. We still have a few minutes. If you do have a question, please feel free to enter that. We also have an attachment for you, so if you want to learn more about how NSPM can address today's security challenges, there is an infographic that you can find under the attachments and that reviews some of today's challenges, and some of them were covered by Ron. Other than that, we also have a way for you to rate this webinar and tell us what you think. And if you have other topics that are interesting to you, or if there's a topic that was covered, that Ron covered today, that you'd like to hear more about, then you can also let us know.
Yeah.
So,
may I just mention something, Maya, just quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps just to mention one thing is that, within our company, anyhow, the span of deployments today is about 2,000 companies. So this is something that's not, it's not a few companies here and there. This thing is really caught on, and the span is global, and the span is significant. And as I was mentioning earlier, we are seeing organizations really embracing the concept of automation and orchestration, but being able to do so with the ability to do complex compliance checking and the ability to fully document what's going on. That's huge to organizations today, and they are embracing it and they are moving forward with it.
Okay, and thank you, Ron. And we do have another question. There's a question here on the firewalls that are supported for policy automation today. Okay.
Yeah, so today, we support the main, I like to say, I call them the kind of like the billionaire club of firewalls, right? All the big guys. So the Checkpoint, Palo Alto Networks, Juniper, Cisco, Fortinet, StoneSoft, which is now ForcePoint. That's from the on-prem kind of traditional firewall environments. And with that, we do support virtualized versions of those firewalls, multi-context, that whole thing. And then on the cloud environment, when we start taking a look at things like the security groups that exist, we support AWS, Azure. Later on, we'll be supporting Google Cloud Platform, and then also we support OpenStack and NSX. But it's more than that too. Also, we have something we refer to as the Tufin Open Platform, which also allows us to bring in, from a monitoring perspective, devices that are not necessarily firewalls, but you still want to monitor. So that could be, for instance, like a proxy server, like a Blue Coat proxy, or a load balancer, like an F5 load balancer, something like that. We can do that as well through a lightweight monitoring capability. And of course, we're always expanding our capabilities, every year.
Yeah, that sounds pretty comprehensive.
It is. Yeah, we have the widest support out there today.
Yeah, it sounds like with the deployments that you were describing earlier, that's probably a requirement. So thank you very much, Ron, and thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. We are out of time, unfortunately, but if you still have a question, you can still type that in, and we can follow up with you on your question. So thanks again. Thanks, Ron.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And thanks, everyone, for joining today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.